Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good evening, Rush Nation, and welcome to the Dynasty Show. Unfortunately, Dan can't make it and be with us tonight, so you have me, Hannah, your host. Thankfully, I've got a fabulous guest lined up for us tonight who's going to give us some awesome information, and that's my good friend Mags. He is at Hot Seat Mags on Twitter. He is the co-host of the Wildcard Rewind with me, and we record on a Monday night. But he's also a host of the fabulous Dynasty Hot Seat Show, which you can find on Twitter at Dynasty Hot Seat and also on his YouTube channel. And he has so much Dynasty content coming out for you at the moment, so I would highly recommend you going across there to take a look. So good evening, Mags. Thank you so much for joining me again for the second evening in a row. And I'm really excited to be talking some Dynasty with you tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Hannah. It's great to be here on 5 Yard Dynasty. You know, I'm obviously not going to be able to fill Dan's shoes, but I'll give it a good go.
Oh yeah, I think you're going to do fabulous. I know how good you are on the hot seat, so really looking forward to it. So tonight, so we'll start off with a little bit of kind of general strategy, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into kind of this year's class, how to dominate your drafts this season. So Mags, let's kind of get started and have a look at how do you choose to approach your rookie drafts? Do you have a set strategy, or do you kind of go in with a bit of an open mind and see how the board falls to you?
Yeah, so there's a lot to this. So it's really, really interesting. And you know, obviously doing the Dynasty Hot Seat, every guest I have on, I always ask them for hints and tips. And by far and away, the most common bit of advice is read the goddamn rules. Know what the scoring system is in your league. Is it tight end premium? Do quarterbacks get extra points for rushing? How many points is it for a throwing touchdown? How many points is it for a rushing touchdown? You need to read the rules. And if you're lazy and can't be bothered reading the rules, here's a little tip for you, all right? If you go on Sleeper, if you're on Sleeper, I don't know about MFL. If you're on MFL, you probably have to do a Sudoku to find this. But you go on Sleeper, and if you click on scores and you filter to last year, you can see who the highest scoring players were. And you might be surprised by who's sitting at the top and who's a bit further down. So kind of use that to help you figure out who you should be taking in these drafts. If it's 1.5 PPR for whatever reason, you're probably going to look at someone like, you know, Josh Downs, Jordan Addison, these people who are going to get extra points. If you get extra for rushing touchdowns, you're going to want these bigger running backs. You got to read the rules. So that's the first thing I do. Is I see what are the scoring settings for this league and which players are going to benefit me based upon those settings. And yeah, then you just go from there. I'd say in Superflex, you got to always kind of value the quarterback first before anything else. And then apart from that, it's like you said, let the board come to you. Don't be afraid to be aggressive if there's someone you really like. But another really good bit of advice I've got before is, I know there's going to get your guy and all of that, but don't be too obsessed with, I got to come out every draft with Dalton Kincaid. I got to come out every draft with this guy, You want to diversify your portfolio of players is the way it was put to me by Scott Connor, who's over at Dynasty and Chill, one of the brightest minds of the game. Yeah, he said diversify your portfolio. Don't be too invested in one particular player because sure, if it hits, you're absolutely laughing. But if it doesn't, you got a lot of work to do on a lot of teams. So yeah, you got to be pretty careful.
Yeah, I think sometimes we find that a little bit difficult. You know, we get this, oh, I love this guy in the pre-draft process. He looks awesome. I think he's going to do great in the NFL. And then we kind of want to go out there and get him on as many teams as possible because we think this is my guy. And then, you know, there is always that risk with the rookie drafts that, you know, unfortunately, one of these players may well bust. And like you say, you know, if you've taken him on every single one of your teams, then you've got a bit more kind of making up to do than if you'd have diversified a little bit more. I mean, I think I would also, you know, say, you know, don't be afraid to take a punt on some of those players that you were less keen on as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think I've been seeing quite a bit on like Jonathan Mingo recently. I think he is one of those kind of boom bust profiles, and I think he's very polarizing. And I think there's a lot of people that are quite down on him and like, oh, I don't want to take him. I don't think he's going to do well, which I think is, perfectly fair argument to have. But I still think if you've got a big number of teams, it's worth taking a punt on him in some situations, because if he does hit, then at least you know that you have got, at least one share of him on one of your teams.
Yeah, and if you don't like him, just trade him away after.
Yeah.
But at least you got that share, right? If you're like, I still don't like him, but that's at least worth something, and you can trade it away to get someone that you do like. So diversify a bit and take players, even though you might not like them. I always think for like new dynasty players, one of the best moments you can have is whenever you're listening to like a podcast, like this great podcast, listen to it, and you like start to disagree with what people say. I think that's such a huge step, because then you're finally like starting to form like your own opinions about it. You're not just listening to like the talking heads like me and you, right? And you're starting to think for yourself. So I always think that's a big step as well. Like, listening to as many people as possible, getting your own opinion, and then, not being afraid to sometimes, even though you disagree with someone, just go, you know what? I can take a chance. I trust this person's opinion. I'll just go with it. Even though I don't agree, I'm going to give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that also applies to startups as well. In my first year, which obviously was only a couple of years ago, I took so much Robert Woods, and it was the year that Cooper Kupp went off. And then I was like, damn, I should have at least thought about taking some different. So I try and take that into all of my drafts, whether that's rookies, that's startups, dynasty, or redraft. I always try and diversify my portfolio, because we can all be wrong. At some point, I'm sure there's times when you've been wrong. There's certainly times when I've been wrong. Yeah. And, all of the analysts out there, and even, general players, we get it wrong sometimes. So I think it is worth kind of being a bit brave and saying, okay, I'm going to take that share, and see what happens. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But if it goes well, then like you say, you've always got a piece to trade if you don't like the player.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question I have for you really is, does your strategy change when you are kind of higher up the draft board? So, picking in the early, 101, 102, 103, versus when you're picking later on at the 110, 11, 12 spots. And I would say that would be based on, where your team has finished rather than the trades you've made and things like that. Yeah. Does your strategy change there, or do you stick to these are my tiers and this is how I'm going to draft? Or do you say, right, I'm at the 101, 102, 103, my team is terrible. I've got to potentially take more of a risk here, be braver, not necessarily in the first round, but obviously looking at your deeper rounds as well.
Yeah, it is it's a different game completely whenever you're picking up, even just look at this draft class, like you're going from these elite level quarterbacks and Bijan Robinson at the top to like this kind of like disgusting kind of pick 10, 11, 12 that nobody really wants at the minute. And it's quite interesting this year because everybody's advice is if you're picking like 110, just trade back. So but nobody wants to trade up. Like, so it's really hard because everyone's saying you should trade back. Nobody's saying you should trade up into those places. So it's almost impossible to actually, trade back. So it is quite tricky sometimes. I think if you're a bad team, usually if you're playing Superflex, you're probably a bad team because you got bad quarterback. So I think that's usually in the draft. You'll hear a lot of people, and there is certainly reason to say this, but a lot of people say you cannot draft for position. You have to take the best player available. I think that is true unless it's a quarterback. You got to take quarterback. You got to, because you cannot trade for these guys. You can trade for wide receivers, you can trade for running backs, you can trade for tight ends. That's fine. But it is nigh on impossible to go out and trade for a top quality quarterback. I think if that's a position you're lacking, that's the only time you should really take position ahead of the talent. So I would have that advice, if you're at the top of the draft or, even at the back of the draft, if you've somehow squeaked through without a quarterback and you're at the back end of the draft this year, you got to take Will Levis. Even though he's maybe not the best prospect, I think you got to take him because if you're that quarterback away from your team becoming like a real dynasty, you've got to take the chance and fill in that gap. It's the most important position when you're playing Superflex, in my opinion anyway. And apart from that, I think what you said before is you just kind of take best player available. Don't be afraid to be aggressive and trade up. it's always good to think about, are you willing to, sacrifice some picks further down the line, like in 2024, 2025 to move up? But if you are going to do that, at least, do some research. Don't be throwing away 2024 picks to move up in this class, because it looks like the top end of the 2024 class is looking really, really good at the minute. So do a bit of due diligence before you throw away pieces, and think about, and Hannah, stop me here if you think this is nonsense, right? So all of these picks eventually turn into players. Don't think about, I'm going to give up 1-7 to get this. Think about, I'm going to give out Jordan Addison, the player, to give this. So instead of giving it arbitrary numbers, these are like real players now. So try and think of them as actual players. And what is this player going to bring to your team? Not what is this pick going to bring to your team? Sorry, I completely went off the topic there, kind of.
No, not at all. I think all of this is great advice. And yeah, it does make sense. Obviously, now we know who these rookies are, where they're roughly going in ADP. You can have an idea like who would be there for me at the 107. What could they bring to my team? What benefits can they bring to somebody's team? What's the chance of them being good? What's the chance they're going to bust? And kind of, figure it out from there. I'd like to go back a little bit to when you said, in a super flex league that you think that, QB is always the priority. Yeah. So, if you need one. So I'm interested. So if you were picking at the 101 and you had a QB needy team, would you go with a QB over Bijan Robinson, or would that be the exception?
He's the exception, right? Because whenever I talked about it is nigh on impossible to trade for a QB, I mean, Bijan Robinson is nigh and on and possible. He is all of those things, and you can just use him to get all but 5 quarterbacks probably, right? You're going to trade for that 101, and you'll be able to, most people, if you got the 101, you probably aren't ready to use Bijan unless you've been incredibly unlucky or you traded for it, right? So the best advice probably is to trade back, try and get one of these quarterbacks and not take Bijan. But you know what, Hannah? That's not as fun, is it, right? Everybody just wants to have Bijan on their team. It's not as fun. So, I can give all the advice I want, but most people are going to be like, I'm just going to take Bijan. And I understand.
Yeah, I know. I totally get it. I mean, for me, we had a bit of a discussion with this on Evan when he came a few weeks ago. He was saying that he thinks you should take a QB, and obviously we all have our different opinions. I personally didn't agree. I do think that if you are not able to trade back, I think you should still take him. And I think he is a great piece that you can use in a trade later on down the line, whether that be later in the off season, at the start of the season, when everyone realizes how amazing he is, and those contenders are going to start to show, and they're going to want a decent running back to put them over the top. So, I think you can quite easily, potentially use him as a piece to try and trade for a decent starting quarterback. The problem I have with these, rookie QBs is we don't know what they're going to be. Now, they seem good. Bryce Young, everyone's saying he's great. I'm sure he's a great talent, but there is still going to be risk there. He is small. There's a chance he's going to be injured. CJ Stroud, we're all expecting him to probably be a pocket passer, not do too much with his legs. So that will bring him, down in kind of the tiers and the rankings. And then, everybody loves Anthony Richardson, but we have no idea what he's going to be. He could be absolutely amazing, or he could bust within 5 weeks, and we just don't know what we're getting. Whereas if you get Bijan and then you can trade him for a reliable starter, or one of these mid-tier QB1s, you're laughing, and that's probably going to turn your team round relatively quickly in a super flex league if you're getting a decent starting QB who's going to kind of be the anchor for your team, and then you can build off that.
I bet you can get Lamar. I bet you can get Lamar Jackson for Bijan Robinson. How about that? I bet you can get that deal done.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a lover of Bijan, I think you could definitely do that for sure.
Get that deal done. And actually, you mentioned something that's really interesting there. You mentioned about these quarterbacks and what they are. One thing is kind of hard to forget sometimes, and it kind of seems obvious, but remember, we're not NFL teams drafting NFL players. Here, we're fantasy owners drafting fantasy players. So Bryce Young, while he did go 1 overall, and he probably is the best overall quarterback in this draft, that does not mean that automatically he is the best fantasy quarterback in this draft. we talked about CJ Stroud, not really using his legs. He at least has shown that he can use his legs. Bryce Young is kind of like a bit of a scrambler, like he can do it, but he's not gonna win you games because of the rushing upside. For Bryce Young to become, fantasy elite, people have said, oh, well, Drew Brees did it. It's like Drew Brees at one stage held the all-time passing yards total in the NFL. You saying that's what Bryce Young needs to do to become fantasy relevant? Because that is a lofty, lofty thing to try and do. So he's got to do so much more because of his skill set than someone like Anthony Richardson or, even CJ Stroud. I mean, we've seen last year, Justin Fields was, quarterback 5, 6, 7, something like that. He barely threw the ball at all just because he ran so much.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that, we're in a different era now, from when Drew Brees did it. There weren't that many mobile QBs. Lamar Jackson, potentially was the only one if he was in the league at that time. Times and the QB landscape is changing really quickly and quite dramatically. So, I think he would even, putting up these amazing gaudy numbers, he probably would struggle to become the overall QB1, based on what we have and, what talent we've got with the rushing upside, etc., in the QB position now. And I think that also shows in where these are being drafted in things like startup leagues. Now you can't get an elite QB any later than the 4th round. Some of them are going in round 1 now. They're like super duper coveted, in a 1 QB league, which was unheard of a few years ago. Really it'd be first QB in the 4th round, if that. Now all of these elite ones are pushed up, and it's just so different, and I think we've got to take that into account, and look at the QB skill set and say, what is that going to bring me in fantasy, and are they, going to be as elite as we want and hope them to be. So based on that, I'm just interested, Max, who is your QB1 fantasy, dynasty for this rookie draft?
Oh, Anthony Richardson with a bullet. Like, I think he's like, not only does he have the highest ceiling, I think he might have the highest floor, at least for this year, right? If he flips out and gets dropped, like, fine. But the amount that he's going to rush, we just talked about Justin Fields, right? Justin Fields showed that you don't have to be able to throw the ball to become a top 10, or fantasy quarterback here. And Justin Fields is probably a top 10 dynasty quarterback as well at the minute, if not top 8. He's put the blueprint forward that you can use your legs and become hugely successful. And while CJ Stroud and even Bryce Young, they're probably like safer picks, I suppose, I think you got to take Anthony Richardson. I mean, I know Murph, who'll be listening to this, is just be like, no, Mags, I know he's watched him play at college the whole time and he doesn't think that he's good enough. But I just think him going to that Shane Steichen offense, they know how they're going to use him. They've worked with someone like Jalen Hurts, turned him around, improved him as a passer. Now, while Jalen Hurts was a much better passer in college than Anthony Richardson, we've seen it done before. But I think Anthony Richardson is a much better athlete than Jalen Hurts, and we've seen what he can do. So I just think he's the only league winner out of those 3. How about that? Right? CJ Stroud isn't a league winner. Bryce Young's not a league winner. Anthony Richardson is a league winner.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, most teams that are going to be drafting at the 102, they're going to be, rebuilds or not contenders. And I think, at that point, you've got to take the risk, right? He can bring massive, massive upside and a great floor. They've said already that he's going to be on the field this season. So even if he only plays for you this season, you can either 1, trade him away and get hopefully a haul to, rebuild next season, or buy players to build up your team, or 2, you ride him this season, you see where we are, and you go from there. So I think you have to take that chance. I think you would regret passing over him for one of the other QBs if he broke out and became a massive fantasy star. Obviously it does come with risk, but at the same time, I think it's totally worth taking that risk, particularly, with where you are within the league. You've got to do it, and potentially he could have massive, massive upside for you.
Yeah, this is weird. I almost feel like the quarterbacks, the 5 sort of viable quarterbacks that you could possibly take in the first 2 rounds here, like, this might sound weird, but I almost feel like they're in 5 separate tiers. Like, I really do. I feel like Richardson's up there, and then it's Stroud in a tier of his own. And I feel it's Bryce Young in a tier of his own. And I feel it's Will Levis in a tier of his own. And then I feel like I said, like, I feel like there is significant gap between those guys in terms of what they can bring for your fantasy teams.
Yeah, it's going to be. I'm actually really excited to see what they do this season.
Yeah.
You know, I think some of it is going to be situation. So Stroud, I think, is going to be reliable, but I think he potentially is going to struggle a bit this season to give us too much fantasy value because, you know, the team isn't all the way there yet. You know, we know that his pass catches are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what Hannah was going to say. Sorry, Hannah, you cut out a bit. I'm sure you were just talking about his pass catchers weren't too great. There was Robert Woods and Tank Dell and well, I think John. We got a few people coming back for them, right?
Yeah, and obviously Mechie, we don't know anything about him, so you know there's still a lot to learn from there. And I think there's always kind of the first season for rookies is always a bit rocky. I think unless you've got amazing legs and you're going to run everywhere, and then obviously, you know, you can build those up. Yeah, he could. He didn't want to do it, did he? He did when he really, really have to. They might scheme him up to do that. It'll be really interesting to see what they do anyway this season. All of these QBs are going to be really interesting. So you mentioned this a bit earlier in terms of, you know, you were saying in Superflex drafts, you feel that, you know, if you need a QB, then you should take a QB over some of the other positions. Is there any other situation in which you feel that need trumps value, or would that be the only situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that might be the only situation. Like, you got to think about, again, these are players that after you drafted them, they become immediately tradable assets. And, you know, the QB is just so hard to buy and so hard to get hold of. Like, if you draft a wide receiver, guess what? You can find a wide receiver needed team and you can trade with them for a running back that you might need, that you might like a little bit more. Like, don't feel limited to the pool of players in this rookie draft. Like, feel free. If your wide receiver room is absolutely stacked and you're sitting at the 106, don't reach. Like, don't go and try and get Devon Achane at 106. Take Jackson Smith and Jigba and go and trade him for someone that's already been playing for a while. See if you can get, I don't know, Miles Sanders plus for Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? See if you can use that asset and get a veteran player plus extra on top to make your team better that way. Don't reach and get a Devon Achane at 1-6 because, you know, while he's a great player and everything, he should be taking him ahead of Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, I would totally agree there. I mean, the other thing is, I would say, you know, use tiers because, you know, potentially within those tiers, there may be players at a position that you need. So, you know, in this tier, you might have a wide receiver, a couple of running backs, and maybe a tight end. And the decider might be actually, I need a running back. So I'm going to go running back here, or, you know, I need that wide receiver. So I'll go with that. But I think, I think you totally agree here based on what you've just said, you know, if there is a tier break between the players that are available, even if you don't need them, you should take the best player available.
Yeah.
And then
don't forget what I said earlier. Like, don't just be like, right, I'll trade back and I'll get, you give me an extra third. It's like, who's that third going to be? Like, think about who is that actually going to be. You're not getting 109, so you'll get, for Jackson Smith and Jigga, you'll get Devon Achane and a third. Like, that could be Devon Achane and anybody. Like, you have to look at how the draft is going to go and think, well, if I was offered Achane and Marvin Mims for him, would I take it? Maybe. If I was offered Achane and this person, would I take it? Or are you better off going for a veteran player and thinking, oh, what's the better deal for me? So don't forget that, you know, these picks are people too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said there. So what I'm also interested in is, what do you think generally of the qualities of this kind of rookie group this year? Do you think it's high quality, a bit, where do you think they kind of sit with our recent kind of rookie crops for the last few years?
It's a really interesting class. I think obviously the draft hurt a lot of these running backs in particular, a couple of the wide receivers maybe. I think any class where you're coming out of it where there are 6, and some might say 7, some even say as high as 8, like really good players in the first round, that's a pretty good class. Like whenever you got 8 players in that first round where everyone seems pretty happy, like where they've landed, everyone's pretty sure they're going to hit right away and be a dynasty asset right away. I mean, that's par for the course. I mean, you don't often get a class where all 12 players in the first round are like smash hits, and just go back and think about the past couple of classes and look at who was going at 112, and you kind of go, oops, Trey Sermon, oops, other people like that. You're like, yeah. So I think this class is getting a bit of a bad name for itself. However, there is an issue. I think after there's like these weird chasms, like after 108, I think there's this kind of nasty little bit of non-value until like the back end of the first round. And then once you get to like 203 or something, there's like a nice little sweet spot, and then it gets nasty for a bit. And then there's little pockets of value that you kind of want to be in here. But overall, I think this class is getting a bit of a, I think it's because it was so hyped, Hannah, right? Everyone was so excited about this 23 class, and everyone traded away all of their picks to get like into this first round for the 23 class. And yeah, I don't know what people were expecting, but I think getting 78 real top class players, that's about as good as it gets, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I already think people are like, brushing this class aside and saying, I'm looking forward to 2024. There's these 2 great quarterbacks coming out. There's amazing wide receivers, this 2023 class, they're complete rubbish. But actually, until they play in the NFL, you never actually know. And I think potentially there could be some diamonds in the rough with this class that, nobody's talking about that come out onto the scene and look, really good. So I agree. I think they're getting a bit of a bashing, and they've actually not been able to prove themselves in the NFL as of yet. And I think, there's potentially some value to be had here. And even if they don't end up being elite options or, stars on your team, I think there's certainly going to be plenty of, players that will give you fantasy production on your team. So you mentioned it a little bit, saying that there's probably about 8, players in that first round, which you think, have decent first round grades, let's say. So if you are in the back of that first round, is there somewhere that you would look to move out from? I know we kind of mentioned it a bit earlier. I think everyone's kind of been saying, man, we're not keen on the back of the first round, so it's difficult to do. But have you been trying to do that, and have you been successful?
I mean, obviously, a player like me, I end up at the back of the first round a lot, Hannah, right? I mean, you can try a couple of things, right? The best thing I always like to talk about on the hot seat as well is, if you want to make a trade with someone, like, don't just fire off a trade. Like, give them a message. Be like, hey, I've got this pick. Any interest in moving up? Like, try and open up a bit of dialogue, because unless you're on the clock and you got like no time left, right? But yeah, try and open a little dialogue, have a chat with someone. That might make it easier to see what they're thinking about. Everyone's got rookie fever at the minute. And even though people are saying, they don't like this like slot, like 9, 10, 11, 12, somebody out there loves Quentin Johnson. Like somebody out there loves like Zach Charbonnet still, right? People, or Will Levis. There's always these believers and these players out there somewhere. You just got to find them. And if that's, saying, you know what, give me your second round pick, or give me second round pick plus, or give me your 2024 first. Like, even straight up, if you really don't believe in these guys, just like, what, I'll take a flyer. I'll take a shot on a 2024 first. Let's see what happens. Yeah. If you really don't believe in it, then yeah, feel free just to trade it away. Get 24 first, get a veteran, try and trade back. And if none of it works, do what we talked about earlier. Take a guy you don't like. Like for me, that's Quentin Johnson. I know enough people that believe in Quentin Johnson and say that he's good talent, that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to listen to you guys. Even though I don't necessarily believe it, enough people say it, I'll take a shot on Quentin Johnson. So don't be afraid to, go against your best judgment and listen to somebody else now and again.
Yeah, I totally agree there. I think, as you say, there's been a lot of discourse about the end of this round one. And I think a lot of people are aware that, people are going to want to trade back and they're a little bit wary. But I totally agree. And I think this is the same with any trade that you do. Starting a dialogue and a conversation, I think, is more likely to get the trade done than just sending over an offer and nothing else, because people don't know, how much you want that player, who you want, what kind of thing you're willing to give up, etc., etc. And I think sometimes it's much easier to come to a compromise when you talk about it than when you just fire off a thing, and they go, "Oh, I don't like that," and they just say, "No."
Or like be aggressive with it, like move up, use this, and like move up. Like if you don't want it, get rid of it, give that to somebody else. See if you can get up into those top 6 picks and say, right, you know what, I got 110. I'll give you 110, and hell, I'll give you my second as well. Can I move up 3 spots? Yeah. All of a sudden, you got a player you really like, and you're not having to worry about this kind of bad value towards the back. And hey, you lost a second round pick. What's the hit rate on second round pick players? Not huge, right? So, yeah, if you're really that desperate, go for it.
So while you're kind of looking, talking about moving up, are there any players in this rookie draft that you are keen to move up for? Is there someone there that you're like, oh, I would really, like X, Y, or Z? Obviously, Bijan kind of, excluded here. Is there anyone in that kind of top 6, 7 that you're like, I really like this guy, and if I have the opportunity to move up and maybe lose my second, I would aim to go to X spot for Y player?
Yeah, if I need a quarterback, any of these quarterbacks you're wanting to move up for, you could play the waiting game and get a Will Levis. I'd rather move up and get a CJ Stroud, or if you can really move up to get Anthony Richardson, you could do that as well. Again, you have to look at your team here. Like if it's tight end premium, I'm more than willing to move up and get a Dalton Kincaid. If I'm lacking a little bit in receiver, see what it's looking like, you could move up to get Jackson Smith and Jigba. So no one in particular is standing out apart from those quarterbacks. But yeah, again, you got to check your team and see where you fall, really.
And obviously the draft is not just about the first round. Obviously, we know that the hit rate in the first round is much higher than any others, but you also got to go out there mining for gold in those later rounds. So tell me, Mags, who is your gold in rounds 2 to 4? Who's your kind of chosen targets around there?
So I got a couple. I've been doing for the last couple of months kind of like a rookie ADP. Started it off kind of 2 months before the combine, about a month and a half before the combine, let's say. And I've done it on a semi-regular basis, like taking about 5 or 6 mock drafts from all over and kind of working out an average draft position based on those. So it's been quite interesting to see how people have gone up and down, up and down. So I've kind of gone fishing for, well, who were people really high on like before the draft? And why has that plummeted so much? And I'm like, well, they must have been high on this person like for a reason, I suppose, right? Yeah. So some of the gold that I'm really spotting in here, something that stands out for me is Tajay Spears, actually, because everybody like loved this guy for a little bit. There was that little window where people loved him. Obviously, we found out about the ACL injury. You know what? That's not really, well, not ACL injury. He doesn't have an ACL, so it's not really an injury. But I'm not too worried about that. That didn't really hold him back too much in college, so I don't see why that would all of a sudden be an issue in the NFL. Obviously, he's behind Derrick Henry, but I mean, how long is Derrick Henry going to stick around? Good luck. Like, try selling Derrick Henry in Dynasty, see how much you get, right? So if that's really, you know, the reason why people are off of him, I'm taking Tajay Spears. I've seen him fall, you know, into the 3rd round sometimes, which I think is just unbelievable value. And Hannah, can we talk about a guy? I'm not high in this guy, but what's happened with Jalen Hyatt?
I don't know. I don't get it, because I think that they're going to scheme him up and going to give him as many touches as they can, because, you know, I know they're saying that, you know, potentially he's a slot, but I mean, he can stretch the field, which is what they need. So I think they're going to be trying to get him the ball as much as possible, because he's the only one that has kind of a bit of a different skill set to the other 50 million wide receivers that they have, you know, on their team. So I actually think that he could do pretty well here, but people don't seem to be high on him at all.
Yeah, I mean, he got like he got round 3 draft capital, right? It was in the 3rd round, but you know, he's ended up going to like a really good system where there's no real competition around him. Like, yeah, I think that's a really good landing spot for him, and people were so high on him before. And I'm not a Jalen Hyatt guy, but I got Jalen Hyatt in the 4th round. Like,
yeah, it's crazy.
That is just, I could not take him there So I think that is potential, gold there. I mean, and then I'm going back to what I said earlier, and it's, am I willing to go against like my better judgment and take players that I know people like out there, people like Keishon Butte, who people still, really, really believe in. It's like, if I'm in the 4th round and he's still there, you know what? People I know, people I trust, people I respect, they have put their neck out in the line for him. It's like, sure, let me grab a share of Keishon Butte in the end of the 3rd or in the 4th round. So I think, whenever you're digging for gold, like you put it, I think, you got to take a shot on some of these guys. Like, even who's the running back? Look at Sean Tucker, right? Sean Tucker, whenever we talked about the ADP, I gathered before the combine, he was running in an ADP number 12, a 1st round player. And obviously there's been health concerns that's come out and some other things come out about Sean Tucker. But again, you're getting him 4th round, a guy that people once valued as a 1st round player. You got to take the shot. You got to just pick him up. You're not going to get anyone else in the 4th round that's going to do anything. So you may as well go for these guys that were once valued up here and now they're down here. You're just hoping they're somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, exactly. Before the draft, people valued them based on what they saw on film. So, these guys must have had some talent or shown something that people saw on film to make them value them, in this 1st, 2nd round or whatever. Obviously, we know potentially the NFL has not valued them the same, but as you say, a lot of these things are potentially medical or whatever that might be. And we know sometimes these things are wrong, or players can get these fixed, or they manage to play through these things and still show what talent they have. Like you said, 3rd, 4th round is an absolute dart throw. So you want to try and go with these players that have shown that they have talent and could potentially do it, in the NFL. So I think it's totally worth doing that. The one guy that I like to try and target in kind of deeper leagues when you're going into your 5th, or even if very kind of last pick in the 4th round, that's that Charlie Jones that went to the Bengals. Obviously, home girl.
No, me too, though.
But realistically, we know that Tyler Boyd is not going to be here for that much longer. This is his last year on his contract. They're not going to renew it. They just do not do 3rd contracts. I think Charlie Jones has been, drafted as the heir apparent to Tyler Boyd. I don't think necessarily he's going to have any impact this season, but we know that Tyler Boyd, especially in PPR leagues, has put up some solid value, and, decent weeks, in fantasy. So I think Charlie Jones is worth a punt. Look, if he comes to nothing, he comes to nothing. But there's a chance that he ends up being a Tyler Boyd-esque player on your team, and he contributes for you on your flex spots for 5 years to come. So I think it's totally worth a punt on him.
Yeah, and some other just advice, if you're really stuck, if you're in the 4th round, you're like, I have no idea who to take. I don't like any of these guys that are gone. Like some of the people we mentioned may be gone. Just take a running back. There's more of a chance that they're going to, see a rise in potential. What works for running backs doesn't work for other positions. So if you think about Tyler Boyd, right? Tyler Boyd goes down and all of a sudden you get Irwin, is it, for the Bengals? He comes in. Irwin doesn't get the targets that Tyler Boyd had. They just go to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Irwin doesn't get any. But Joe Mixon goes out. Samaje Perine gets all of Joe Mixon's work because there's only one of them, right? So you got a 1 in 3 chance for the wide receiver to make up the targets. You got almost 100% chance the running back is going to come in and eat up that workload. So if you're sitting in the 4th, you don't know who to take, just take Dwayne McBride. Someone like that, right? That's got at least a path. The Bengals took a running back, right? Can't remember his name, but the Bengals took a running back.
Brown, was it Chase Brown?
I can't remember, but yeah. So just someone who has a path to success. They're one injury away from potentially scoring some points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in those really deep kind of rookie drafts, 4th and 5th round, even those kind of RB3s on teams, I think they're worth targeting over, some of these deep wide receivers that you think they might not ever see the field, because, RB1 goes down. It might be that actually they don't feel the RB2 can take the full workload, and they end up in a bit of a timeshare, and even if they don't, take all of those kind of touches, getting 50%, may mean that they actually do contribute for your team, and you can put them in flex spots some weeks. We know that potentially you could be struggling with running backs as we start to get injury. So it's always handy to have more on your bench, and they can give you extra points if someone else's running back goes down. So I agree. If you can, I would always take, if you have no one else that you know of, or you think, I don't like any of these wide receivers, running back is always a great shout, because there is a path to relevance, with injuries, and we know it and we've seen it. And how many kind of undrafted running backs have we seen end up putting up massive numbers or giving us some value versus, some of the wide receivers which have given us, nothing, and often not even set foot on the field. Yeah. So totally agree with you there. Is there anybody in this class that you think, I know we've talked about, even if you don't like them, potentially take them, but is there anyone that you really think, I want minimal shares of this player, I just don't believe in them?
Yeah, so you basically take what I'm doing anyways. I'm taking the same process and I'm just kind of going like that. And I'm like turning it on its head. It's like, who were the players that people are really, really low on? And now after the draft, people are really, really high on, right? So it's kind of the opposite of where you find the value. And I know you did kind of mention him up at the top, but Jonathan Mingo's right at the top of that list. So in my sort of pre-draft process of gathering in all of the data of like mock drafts and where people were, Jonathan Mingo, before the combine, did not appear at all in any 3-round mock drafts that I looked at. He was never drafted inside the top 3 rounds. Not once. Didn't score. Then in between like the draft and the combine, he finished as player number 39. And now he's all the way up at 16. So that is going from not on anyone's list all the way to the 16th best player in this draft. That seems like a drastic jump up for me. So it's probably not someone that I'm willing to have too many shares in. I'll take one, because like we talked about at the start, I could be wrong, and I'm, wrong about a lot of things. So I'll take one just to make sure. Yeah, but he's one that really, really stands out for me as someone like, maybe a little bit too rich for me. And then the other one, sadly, is a guy I quite like, actually. And someone I was kind of banging the drum for being higher up the boards, but now he's almost risen too high. It's Kendre Miller. He was, again, lingering around the 30s, something like that. Now he's all the way up to 14, so just out of the first round. Maybe that is just about right, but, it does concern me that he's, almost doubled or halved his draft capital. I don't know what the correct expression would be for that, right? But he made a big jump, right? Of, maybe slightly too much. So Kendre Miller's someone I would keep an eye out as well. But again, I'll take one just to make sure that I'm not completely wrong. Those are the 2 players for me, Hannah, that really, really stand out from this draft class as people who have really, really jumped from pre-draft to now.
Yeah, and I do think sometimes we get a bit kind of overexcited about the landing spot, and we say, we can predict that Jonathan Mingo is going to get loads of targets because, all of the rest of the wide receiver room is, old or, not very good or whatever. Or, same with Kendre Miller. We know that potentially Kamara is going to have this suspension. And so we're all seeing this, look at this. He's got, a big road to being the, running back 1 for a number of weeks. But, teams do all sorts of strange things and anything could happen. It might be last minute they sign, someone who's on free agency and Kendre Miller gets a 10% opportunity share and he's doing nothing, So things can turn on a dime. And again, I think, something that I've heard a lot, and I tend to agree, is that, talent wins out, ultimately. So just because they've got a good landing spot doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to produce if they haven't shown that they're able to do it in college, or we haven't seen that talent. It doesn't mean that they're going to then automatically become amazingly talented in the NFL. Now, some do it. Of course, there's plenty, I'm sure, in history where we can point out and say this guy was crap in college, or, we didn't believe in him and he's broken out and he's amazing. But I think we just sometimes have to temper our expectations. I do feel we were a little bit like this with Sky Moore last year. I'm sure he is talented, but he wasn't, in those kind of within those elite wide receivers, and we got excited because he's going to the Chiefs, and that wide receiver room's wide open now, so Sky Moore could suddenly get all of these targets, and obviously we just didn't see it last season. Now he's developed a bit more, he's worked more with Mahomes. We might see it this season, but I think we got overexcited about he's going to the Chiefs, and we kind of lost sight of the overall picture. I
think you're right. And we're seeing like that this year with Rashee Rice, right? People are now like, pump the brakes, like let's chill. Some people are saying there's been an overcorrection. I think Rashee Rice is he's being drafted about where he should be, I think. I would tend to agree. We know that he's not in kind of that top tier of wide receivers, and he's got a great landing spot, but not necessarily as much of a talent as some of the other wide receivers in this class. So I would totally, tend to agree there. And if he's there in the third round, I would certainly take him. You take a punt, of course, he's on one of these high-end offenses. They're going to be high octane. They're going to pass a lot. So he has potentially the opportunity, but we just don't want to get too carried away. And like you say, I think potentially we did that last year, and it burnt some people. And I think they lost a bit of faith in Sky Moore, and I think potentially he could end up being a little bit of a sleeper this year, because people have kind of stepped back and gone, oh no, he burnt me last year. I don't want him, or I want to sell him, or whatever. Can I just say before, I don't want to dampen the mood too much, but people are obviously upset about landing spots, and I'm like, there are three of these players, or three of your favorite running backs, are going to take a hit, because Ezekiel Elliott's going somewhere, Kareem Hunt is going somewhere, and Leonard Fournette is probably going to go somewhere too. And, if Alvin Kamara, we talked about, if he ends up serving a suspension, you think the Saints are going to go sign Kareem Hunt immediately, or try to? That's what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not be surprised if he didn't pick someone else up, and I think that is a big possibility. And I think that is the difficulty we have a little bit with running backs, in that things can change in a moment. They can get injured, or their running mate gets injured, and there's still, guys out there that can come and fill that void and have proven they can do it in the NFL. So I think, you think, oh yes, this guy's going to get 3 down workload, and he's not necessarily going to do that. So you draft him really high up because you think he's got the perfect landing spot, he's going to get opportunities, and then all of a sudden actually the room gets really murky and you've overdrafted him, but he's now not going to contribute anything to you. Whereas if you'd have stuck with your tiers, or, stuck with someone's rankings, however you like to draft, if you then took the player with actually where the value was, you'll probably potentially have someone who's going to contribute, rather than overdrafting that running back that you thought was going to do something, and then unfortunately, it's not turned out to be. So I think you just got to temper your expectations, however you like to draft, whether that's through someone else's rankings, or you make your own tiers, or, you amalgamate lots of different information. I would say, just be careful about overdrafting, because it can come and bite you in the bum.
Yeah.
So that was awesome, Mags. I really, really enjoyed kind of talking it through with you all. So before we kind of finish, we've got a couple of things still left to do. One thing I would like to ask you before we finish kind of wrapping up this rookie draft discussion is, what would be your main piece of advice for people about to start their rookie drafts? What would you like, the one piece that you'd like them to go into the draft with? What would that be?
Can I say two? One's a small one. One's a little one. The first one is, go thank your commissioner, will you? These guys are unsung heroes of the dynasty and fantasy community. So thank you, commissioner, for getting you to another draft and setting everything up, and doing all the unseen work that no one sees. So make sure you've done that, right? And after that, like we said at the start, know what you're drafting. Like, are you drafting tight end premium? Are you drafting, what is the scoring? And think about, at the end of the day, this is about points. It's points on the board. So before you pick a player, think, is this player going to get me more points than anyone else left on the board? The answer is yes, pick him. The answer is no, do something else. That's it. Just think, keep it simple, right?
Yeah, totally agree. Keep it simple, kind of let the board fall to you and don't kind of push it too much. But be aggressive where you feel you need to, or, you know, potentially look to move back if you don't like what you're seeing, if you're able to do that. So yeah, awesome. And I loved your first one, Mags. I think that's a great thing to do, thanking your commish. You know, there's a lot of behind the scenes work with dynasty teams and leagues, and, you know, often people are dropping out or you're having to find replacements, and it's just really great to say thank you to them for keeping it going, because unfortunately a lot of dynasty leagues do kind of fold after a couple of years. So, you know, if it's kept going and it's been going for a long time, I think the commission is obviously doing a great job, and you've got a great league. So always nice to thank them.
Absolutely.
So with every guest that we have on Mags, we always ask them to pose a question to our next guest. Obviously, you guys don't necessarily know who that guest is. So Evan was our previous guest, and he posed the following question to you. So if you could go back to your very first dynasty draft you ever took part in, what one piece of advice would you give yourself, and with what you know now?
Okay, so I'll try and do one that it's like not something I've said already. So I've talked about, you know, reading the rules, and I've talked about, you know, drafting your quarterbacks whenever you need them. One piece of advice. Okay. I would say I just trade more, right? And the first, I didn't trade at all. I was almost like too afraid, like, to trade. I'm like, like, I don't want to get rid of these. These are like my picks. Like, I want to keep my picks. And it's like, especially towards the back end, it's like, yeah, just go for it. Like, trade here, trade there. Like, start some more dialogue. Chat to as many of these people as possible off the bat, especially your first like time doing it. Trade a little bit more, chat to people. Don't be afraid to ask other people if you think it's a good trade or not. Like, don't assume that you know this is a good trade because, like, you've listened to, you know, 5 Yard Dynasty and you know, Mag said to trade up and give your second for this. Like, don't listen to like just me. Ask lots of people. You know, don't be afraid to, you know, show a little humility and you know, chat to other people. Ask if it's a good deal, and yeah, talk to as many people as possible. Get your trades going. Just try and make friends and have fun.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, because I think when people first start Dynasty that they're scared to trade. And I think some of that is that, you know, you don't necessarily know or feel like you know trade values and things, and you're kind of worried that you're going to be the person that gets kind of walked all over a little bit, you know, that you end up in these uneven trades, and you miss out on value because you don't really understand what you're doing. So you don't want to be that embarrassed person in the league, you know, so you're kind of scared to do that. But I totally agree with you. If you're not sure, always ask. I'm sure your commissioner can help you. There's always people on Twitter, you know, there's all sorts of different analysts or just other fantasy minds that can talk you through it or help you out. So never be afraid to ask, and never be afraid to send those offers. The worst thing that can happen is they can get rejected.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that is great advice, Mags. So before you go, Mags, we now ask you to pose a question for the next guest. So it can be to do with anything about Dynasty. It can be about this season. It can be about general. It can be about players, whatever you would like to ask.
Okay. So do I know who the guest is? Because I'm not allowed to know, am I?
No, you don't know. So it's...
Okay. Oh, well, I have to say shout out to Evan's actually a commissioner in one of my leagues. So I said shout out to your commissioner. So shout out to Evan, bro. What an absolute legend. Thank you for commissioning that league. That's, you know, props to you. So my question to the next guest would be, all right, how about this? What is the worst trade that you have ever made in Dynasty? And what would you do in terms of adding pieces to fix it? at that current time. So how would you have realistically have made it better? Not like, oh, I would have added in 107 and I would have got Justin Jefferson. Like realistically, how would you have changed it so it would have been of a better value? Or at the time, was it actually a good trade and he just got unlucky?
A really good one. I like it. So I look forward to seeing what our next guest has to say in reply. So before we go, Mags, anything else you would like to share with us or, let us know about? We've obviously mentioned the hot seat, but please plug it again. Let everyone know where they can find you. It's an awesome thing. So would like to get you as many followers or new ones as possible.
Yeah. Make sure you check it out. The Dynasty Hot Seat over on Twitter and on YouTube. I'm actually running a little competition at the minute. So if you go on and click on the latest ADP video, just leave a comment saying, I'm in, and that's it. And you're into a draw to potentially earn access to Dave Wright, who is FF_Spaceman on Twitter. You probably know him. He has an absolutely gigantic, amazing database, years and years and years worth of Dynasty data, comparing all of these players, like their biometrics, their statistics, their fantasy scores, anything you could think of. Is an amazing tool for content creators, is an amazing tool to help your Dynasty teams get better. And it can be yours. All you got to do is subscribe to the channel, go to the latest ADP video, and leave a comment saying, I'm in, and I'll put you in the draw. That simple. And go listen to the Wildcard Rewind, the best damn show out there, Hannah. Isn't that right?
100%. And I totally love Dave, and I already have a subscription to his database, and it is amazing. And as I say, even if you're not a content creator, there's so much information out there just for you to take a look at to help you with your Dynasty team. So I would 100% recommend going across to the hot seat and leaving a comment there so that you can win, hopefully, Dave's access to Dave's database. I would highly recommend it. So thank you guys for tuning in. It's been awesome to have you on, Mags. Really enjoyed chatting through rookie drafts, and hopefully we've helped some people make some decisions for their drafts coming up. So just don't forget to check us out on Twitter at 5 Yard Dynasty, obviously at 5 Yard Rush, and then obviously you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast provider. So until next week, thank you all so much for coming, and don't forget, keep rushing.